Well, joining me now is Michael Bociurkiw, Global Affairs Analyst and Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. He's currently in Ukraine and he's in the western city of Lviv. Good evening to you. Good to see you, Michael. Where you are, Lviv, the western city that yesterday saw its first casualties of this war after those airstrikes. So what is the mood in the city right now, and are people there bracing for more of the same?
Good to be with you again. Yes, absolutely. There's a heck of a lot more anxiety since about a week ago when I left and then returned late last night. I think the feeling now throughout Ukraine is there's the realization that no single inch of the country is safe, in the sense that the Russians have the capability to use long-range missiles, as they did here yesterday morning, to strike at targets. And, that's why Ukrainian officials are pointing this out. They're saying that, they need the technology, the weaponry to stop these missiles from flying anywhere. And then, I also have to point out that we're now entering the thick of things in terms of Holy Week in Ukraine, because they celebrate on the Julian calendar here, usually a time of a lot of migration, usually a more festive period and families getting together. So increasing fears that the Russians, given their track record so far in the past 54 days of the war, will turn to inhumane tactics and even target places of worship like churches, things like that.
I want to look at the situation in the east, where Russia now has got that full-scale assault ongoing. But of course, we have to keep in mind the fact that Russian forces have been attacking the east for 8 years now. So I wonder, does that change the game? If they know the territory, will that make a difference?
Yes, I think so. The Russian-backed thugs that have been there for 8 years, they know the territory very, very well. They have been able to bring in a lot of high-tech weapons because they had unfettered access through what used to be the Ukrainian-Russian border. I mean, we saw it with our own eyes when I was with the OSCE in 2014, 2015. Sophisticated, for example, jamming equipment that actually brought down some of our sophisticated drones. Also, the lay of the land there, Helena, is quite different than other parts of Ukraine where we've seen battles between the Ukrainians and the Russians, in the sense that this is much more flat territory. And I think what you're going to see is a lot more pitched battles where the opposing forces actually face each other. In fact, they've been doing that for the past 8 years along that contact line. And your correspondent, by the way, correctly pointed out that reclaiming Slovyansk and Kramatorsk are huge, both from a military point of view and symbolic point of view. Just quickly, in 2014, some of my colleagues were actually kidnapped by the Russian thugs and held for several days in Slovyansk, and then the city was eventually liberated. So it has a heck of a lot of meaning.
So what will this all mean then on the ground, though? Because if you've got Russia then trying to fully capture the east, and we know that we've got a lot of Russian speakers, of course, in these areas, one would presume that they're going to try and win them over somehow. But you've just spoken about, an up to level of onslaught. Couldn't that just risk stoking more fierce pockets of resistance, which even if you capture these towns, these cities, could then just flare in months, years later?
Yeah, well, look, on the train last night, I actually saw quite a lot of people from the east fleeing to safer parts of Ukraine, like here in Lviv. But I think the situation in the east is you have a lot of areas which have been evacuated because people fear the onslaught of missiles, that sort of thing. But I think what we've seen over the past 8 years in the areas, the so-called government control areas that Russia is now trying to take over, is a real spike in patriotism. Even though these are Russian-speaking areas, people fully realize that they're much, much better off in a thriving democracy like Ukraine rather than under Russia control. And then the other thing we have to remember is, given the track record, what's happened down south, is they also fear perhaps being quote-unquote evacuated to Russia.
Okay. Michael, we'll have to leave it there, but as ever, good to talk to you. Michael Bociurkiw, Global Affairs Analyst and Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council in Lviv.